Okay, in order to watch this shir, you have to prove that you're over 18 years old.
Really?
Okay. This is definitely not a PG shir. Okay? So, today we're going to talk about Rachav. Alright? Remember Rachav? Do you remember who Rachav was? Rachav was the lady who helped the two spies that Joshua sent to give information to them about Jericho. Right? And we left with who was Rachav, right? So let me just see what Chazal say about her. Now you remember what Rachav said about the. Did we get to what she said about what she told the spies?
The condition of the army, the people were despondent.
Were despondent, right? Yeah. Okay, that's very good. Okay, so how did she know that? Right. So here it is. It says, Gemara asks, this is from Zvachim 116a, Gemara. Gemara asks, Mai shana ha'am da'amar. Why is it Why is it that there, regarding the Amorite kings, Scripture states, and there was no longer spirit within them? Right? Whereas here, when quoting Rachav's statement to Joshua's emissaries, it is stated, and no spirit remained direct in any man. It is to intimate that they, the Canaanite men, could not even achieve an erection of the male organ. And how did Rachav know this? For the Master said, there was not a single ruler or leader anywhere that did not cohabit with Rachav the harlot. The Rabbi said, she was 10 years old when Israel left Egypt, and she engaged in harlotry the entire 40 years that Israel was in the Midbar. After attaining 50 years of age, she converted to Judaism. She said to God, let me be forgiven in reward for the rope and the window and the flax, meaning that this way of helping the spies. So
the
that's
rope and the flax, and it's not the same thing?
What?
The
rope is from the flax. So, and there's one other mention of Rachav. Just be patient with me for a second here, and I'll find it.
Joshua married her.
What?
And Joshua married her.
Joshua married her because she did tshuva.
But she was Gioret, right?
Yeah.
50 years old. And how old was he? Half your age, you say? I have no idea how old you are. How old? It doesn't matter how old it was. But she said that. You can give her a little rose, you know. Thank you. But at that time, at that time, probably had younger wives.
Let's look at who Rachav was.
It was not forbidden.
More about Rachav. All right. Okay. Okay, more about Rachav. And this is from Megillah, right?
Right.
We're coming up to Hanukkah, which is followed by Purim, right? Yeah. This is from the Gemara of Megillah. It says more about Rachav. From 15a. The rabbis taught in a brisa there were 4 women of exceptional beauty in the world. Sarah, Abigail, Rachav, and Esther.
Wow.
The Gemara comments, according to the one who said that Esther was of greenish, sallow complexion and appeared beautiful to Achashverosh only by dint of divine intervention, we are to omit Esther from the list and insert Vashti in her place, some say, right? Another brisa about Rachav. Right? The rabbis taught in the brisa, Rachav inspired lust with her name, just her name. Someone would say Rachav, and men would get excited. By merely mentioning her name, one was driven to lust. Yael with her voice, Abigail by remembering her, by thinking of her, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, with her appearance. But Rachav, just the mention of the name excited people.
Means anything?
The Gemara adds, Rabbi Yitzchak said, whoever says Rachav, Rachav will immediately emit seminal discharge. Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, I say Rachav, Rachav, and I am not concerned that anything might happen. Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, when I said that repeating Rachav's name will cause a discharge, I was referring to one who knows her and is familiar with her. So this was Rachav, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. This is explain why Joshua married.
Not necessarily. No.
The Rachav, was her already given Jewish name?
It seems Rachav was her name when they met her. That was her name when they met her.
No. I said, so she was already, by that time she was Gioret, so this is the name that she got as a Gioret? Rachav?
I'm not sure that she is.
Meaning in Hebrew.
What is it?
Rachav, it's like broad. Broad like wide.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Rachav, big.
Right, I think it's a well that Yitzchak digs has a similar name. Actually, the third well that he digs. Right?
So, so that's why I say, I don't know what's this meaning of the word.
Well, we'll find out. Let's go on. Okay?
Yeah.
Clearly, Chazal understood Rachav's primary vocation was prostitution. The Gemara states in Megillah 15 that there were 4 extremely gorgeous women in history. We just read it. Sarah, Rachav, Abigail, and Esther. Of the 4, only Rachav was able to arouse a man simply by the mention of her name. In her time, the very name Rachav possessed an intense eroticism that moved men into alluring worlds of fantasy and desire. Mm-hmm. To those who knew her and could visualize her, she was irresistible. The world-renowned and international celebrity, an excellent businesswoman, the Hollywood madam. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question that one might think of at this point is, well, who were the 2 spies that went to see her? So let's see. Let's read a little bit more about how she built her business. The wall of her house was a wall of the city fortifications. The walls of cities in those days were extremely wide. You know, if you ever go visit the Great Wall of China, it's actually, a 4-lane highway, in fact, along the top of it. And it's, bigger than this house in terms of its width, right? And so it was with the walls of Jericho. The walls of her house were the city's fortifications. The Midrash comments that her local customers would enter her home city side, right? That was the front door. Mm-hmm. They would come in from the city, right? Through her front door. Whereas travelers, brigands, and others, kind of the rough characters, right, would come through her establishment's back entrance, located in the city wall.
What is brigands?
Brigands means pirates, kind of thieves, highwaymen. Mm-hmm. How did Rachav know that the men were dispirited? The Gemara Zvachim relates to this to male virility. As Israel's reputation grew, its army approached, the male Canaanite was afflicted with impotency, brought on by fear of conquest. Rachav's business declined precipitously. This is, if you were today, it would be like if you were Shoppers Drug Mart and nobody was buying Viagra. Or everybody was buying Viagra, actually. Everybody, the Viagra prices went way up. In this case, her business one went down. Rachav's business declined precipitously, and she was certainly in the best position to know the physical and psychological condition of the local combatants. There was no minister or officer of the nation who did not have relations with Rachav. She was world-class, world-famous, conducting her business throughout the 40 years the Jewish people were in the wilderness. And now, note the power of tshuva and repentance. Let the cord of scarlet thread I use in my immoral business now be used for virtue. After she and her family were saved, Rachav converted to Judaism. At the age of 50, she married Yeshua and became the ancestress of 8 prophets who were also Kohanim, including the prophetess Huldah and the prophet Yirmiyahu. The Midrash further extols Rachav as one like Yitro, who was brought near by God, although she was not chosen by him. Unlike Avraham, for example, who was chosen by God after initially drawing near on his own. And the Yerushalmi declares that when the Jewish people follow God's will, God scours the entire world for righteous people that he can bring to cleave to his people, such as Yithro and Rechav. Righteous people? By what standard would Rechav be construed as righteous? We will return to this shortly and attempt to clarify the unique greatness of Rechav. So it seems that she had some very special quality because she'd lived this life of clearly sin, right? And ended up being appropriate to marry Joshua.
Person, yeah.
It's not surprising that the spies naturally gravitated to Rechav's house, and certainly not for licentious purposes. Rechav was well situated to know the thoughts and the capabilities of the armies of Canaan, having, as she did, a close relationship with its kings and officers. Additionally, the Canaanites who had followed the exploits and the travails of Israel in the desert knew from Israel's encounter with Bilam that the God of Israel hates immorality, and that, in the plains of Moab, Israel had yielded to temptation. The last place the king of Jericho would think to look for Israel's spies would be in a brothel. The last place the king of Jericho would think to look for spies from Israel, this very moral place, right, would be in a brothel. Indeed, it was the last place. It was a logical hiding spot, especially considering the identity of these spies. So if you're a good spy, right, you want to go to someplace where you can get information, where you know people have power, right? And clearly a brothel is a good place, you know, if it's a brothel of kings, right? It's a very good place because, you know, people talk to these women and tell them what's on their mind or reveal things to them, right? And also because they're for hire, they have to be very trustworthy for that reason. So the spies in some ways could feel that they could be in a safe place if they paid the price. Right?
Can I ask a question? Yeshua was square?
Yeshua, no. Yeshua was not a Kohen. He was Yeshua ben Nun from...
because it says that from her came Kohanim.
Yes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that,
You mean daughters?
they could have married it. Yeah, daughters could have married a Kohen.
But she herself definitely was not from the family of Kohanim, so that's why came Kohanim,
No,
because by marriage probably.
If he's Kohen, the question is...
No, he's not Kohen.
Can Kohen marry a prostitute?
What?
No, I don't think so.
It doesn't seem to me that that would be a good idea.
And I don't think, is Kohen right? I don't think Kohen is allowed even to marry a Gior.
He wouldn't have been, Kohen wouldn't have been permitted, I don't think, to marry Joshua. To marry Rechav.
No, he would not be, that's what I said.
So let's just continue for a second, right? The text, okay, so we understand that this would be the last place that the king would have looked for Israel. Right? The spies. The text of Navi concealed the identity of the spies, referring to them only as two male spies. The Midrash extols their virtues, these guys who went right to the brothel. No agents were ever as self-sacrificing and attempting to fulfill a dangerous mission as the spies that Joshua sent. Who were they? Anybody know? Any guesses? Who were the spies?
No, I don't remember.
Anybody want to guess?
I read it a while ago. I don't remember.
Who do you think would be the most resistant to temptations of this kind?
Homosexuals.
From the camp. It's an interesting thought, but not in this case.
You mean the temptation of Rechav?
I'll tell you.
Caleb?
Good. Caleb.
Caleb ben
And
Yefuneh.
Yeshua.
Well, Yeshua sent them.
Caleb ben Yefuneh, they were his friend from
Because Caleb had been on the previous mission,
of course, with him,
and he was the only reliable one in that situation. Right.
Yeshua and Caleb.
So, and the other one is the most zealous of Jews, Pinchas, the priest of war. Right, he was the priest of war. Right.
Plague.
Right. No agents were ever as self-sacrificing and attempted to fulfill the dangerous mission as the spies Yeshua sent. Who were they? Pinchas and Caleb. These two individuals were more than Jewish celebrities. They were distinguished in their righteousness. Pinchas was the future Kohen Gadol, who had zealously protected the honor of Israel in Shittim by publicly killing Zimri and Cosby during their very public act of fornication. Right? Remember, he was just bar mitzvah at the time.
Because he was a relative of Aaron, right?
He was a son. A son.
Pinchas was
born later, right?
Pinchas was not a son.
Yeah,
Aaron.
grandson.
Yeah.
Grandson.
He's son of Betzalel.
What? I'm not sure. He would never be suspected of immorality or of lodging at Rachav's inn for illicit purposes. And Kalev was Yeshua's partner in the ill-fated mission that Moshe dispatched, and together they had resisted the blandishments and conspiracies of the other spies. You in it? Spies. Both were ideal candidates for this mission and possessed impeccable credentials. But why was this mission necessary altogether? So now we understood how the spies overcame the allure of Rachav, right? Because one, was Pinchas, who was the most zealous of all Jews, right? And the other was Kalev, who was a tremendously reliable person. The Malbim suggests 5 distinctions between the espionage mission of Moshe and Yeshua, right? In 2 cases, we sent spies, right? Moshe sent spies, and it was such a disaster that when the Jews were only a couple of weeks away from Eretz Yisrael, they turned back into the desert. And God said, you don't want this land? You don't believe I can give you this land? You will not get this land. Instead, the generation that doesn't complain will get this land. The generation that follows later will get this land. And none of that generation gets this land, with the exception of 2 people who are, of men, with the exception of 2 men, who are Joshua and Caleb. They were the only ones over the age of 20 who went into the land from that generation. The Malbim suggests 5 distinctions between these 2 missions. Right? Moshe sent his spies at the behest of the people, whose motivation was not entirely proper, whereas Yeshua did it on his own initiative. And it's very important to follow these differences, right? Yeshua had a plan in mind, right? It wasn't a democratic process. Whereas in Moshe's case, the people said, send spies to find out the land, with the weakness and strength of the land. Right? Indeed, the chronology of events would tend to indicate that Yeshua sent his spies during the 30-day mourning period for Moshe, sometime between the 7th of Adar and the 6th of Nisan. Right? So that means that nobody knew they'd been sent. It wasn't just a secret from the people of Yericho. It was a secret from the Jewish community itself, from the people in the Midbar. Joshua understood that the first place they were going to conquer was Jericho, right? And while people were mourning up to the Shloshim for Moshe Rabbeinu, he called 2 people he could rely on, the ones he could feel most secure about, Kalev and Pinchas, and he said, just slip out of the camp, very quietly, right? And go find out the strengths and weaknesses of Yericho, right? No big deal, right? So they were much more the kind of people we would think of as spies than really what Moshe sent. Moshe sent a group of tourists, really, to look around more than anything else. And everybody knew it. They were all princes. They were all important people. Right. And they were chosen by their tribes. And it was a very different environment.
It means that if Moshe just died and Yeshua became a leader, it means that before Moshe died, he spoke with Yeshua and he told him. He gave him...
It's an interesting thought.
This, and this. Don't do like I did.
Right.
Do it this way now.
It's a very interesting point.
Because he just died. So probably they have some plan how to enter.
There's 2 factors of his death, right? I think you're raising a very important point, and that is, since he just died, what did Moshe tell when Moshe realized that he wasn't going to cross? What were the insights that he gave Joshua, who was going to carry on this role? And I think that your point, look, we did this wrong the first time. Do it differently this time is very good. I think also
why they would send
Joshua. I think we'll come to it in a second. Sure. I think also Joshua was so involved Remember, his name was changed for the first mission, right? And Moshe was very worried about his safety in the first mission, right? He was very concerned that God protect him in the first mission. So Joshua was very aware, even if Moshe had not spoken to him, Joshua would be very aware, if we're going to do this, it has to be very different. It has to be almost not recognizable, right? It was an opportune moment to send spies without the knowledge or input of the people who were grieving for the departed Moshe. Right? It was really a quiet thing.
It was a military operation.
Right?
Yeah.
It was much more of an intelligence operation, right?
But why? Still, I want to ask you, why did they know that Shabbat happened before because of spies? Why would send any spies? Why just...
No, it didn't happen. By the way, it's actually not correct. It didn't happen because of the spies. Tisha B'Av happened. If you remember what happened, right? The people came back and said, it's a good land, it's a rich land, it's a wonderful land, but we can't conquer it, right? And the fact that people believed this, right, indicated not that they couldn't conquer it, but this was a statement that God couldn't conquer it, right? This was a lack of faith in God's ability to conquer it. After God had said, I'm going to give you this land. Right?
Yeah.
So the flaw was not so much in the spies, but the people believing the spies' report that they couldn't conquer it. The question about, why they gave this report, the Mefarshim write many possibilities, right? One of them is it's self-serving. That these were people who were qualified to be the princes of their tribes, in each case, in the Midbar. In a world in which food was always there, water was always there, you spent all your time learning. It was in many ways an ideal environment, but would they be the appropriate leaders in a place where you had to plant and harvest and go through, even in a miraculous country like Israel, still you had to sit down and do your work. Right. And they sensed that that we're not ready for this, right? And if we go into the land, we lose our jobs, right? So it may very well be that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted the people to stay in the Midbar so that they could maintain their position.
How can you lose your job if you're a prince?
Prince, which is a leader.
By the way.
Leader.
By the way,
you're a leader.
You've answered your own question if you think about it for a second. Where's Moshe? He is the leader. He's the one who's supposed to bring them into the land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What's the connection, Moshe and those people? Those people, they give this report because they was afraid to go to land of Israel.
There are many.
They will lose their job.
So hang on for a second.
How you can lose your job? You're a leader.
No, that's not true. You can lose your job.
Yeah,
Absolutely, you can lose your job.
Bad leader. Bad leader.
Look at Korach's situation. Korach felt he should get a position, and he didn't get it, right? And he reacted. He started rebelling, right?
Exactly.
The fact of the matter is that Moshe, who thought he was the one who was going to lead the people into the land, he lived, 80 years of his life, or 40 years of his life with this goal. Right, was told, you're not the one. You're not going to do it. Joshua is the one who's going to take them into the land.
That's right.
And why that happens, it's very complex. It's not so simple to say, simply hit the rock.
Yeah.
Right? Hitting the rock is not the whole story by any means. There's other places that are part of the sum of coming to this conclusion for God. Clearly, the issue of why the spies failed, and the Zohar writes this, is what I'm telling you, in terms of that the spies were not, if the spies were simply cowardly, right, it would be a lot more acceptable for us than if they were really involved in a conspiracy to prevent, Israel from going in, which it seems like they were. It's why Moshe was worried for the imagine two situations, right? The spies come back and they say, we're really afraid to go in, right? And Joshua says, we shouldn't be afraid. God is with us, right? That's one plan. But for some reason, Moshe was worried that Kalev and especially Joshua would be killed by the others. It was his concern that they would be killed, not that they wouldn't be believed, right? So it seems to me that we draw from this a conclusion that they were up to no good, the spies. It wasn't simply, gee, we're scared, right?
So the question, do we have anywhere written how, like, that Moshe specifically prepared the spies, how they, properly...
Which spies?
The spies, and then the
That he
first,
sent?
when they went...
He told them to spy out the land, and he tells them what he wants from them, very clearly.
And so, okay.
Right, and,
So
from his point of view, he wants to know very specific things.
Okay,
right?
ladies, let's...
But they come back with other things.
Questions.
Let's continue.
No, but the question is...
So let's just continue.
Just one thing, that what Galen mentioned...
We're going to come to We're going to come to this question.
After we lecture all the questions.
Because we actually want to see the differences.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So, furthermore, so they were dispatched during the morning period very quietly, right? It was an opportune moment to send spies without the knowledge or input of the people who were grieving for the part of Moshe. It also solidified Yeshua's command. So whereas Moshe succumbed to the will of people, a failure of leadership, Yeshua circumvented the people. Right? He chose to, this is what we're going to do, and I'm not going to discuss it. By the time the mourning period for Moshe ended, Yeshua had a plan of action to present to the nation. Right? Furthermore, the Malbim notes, Moshe dispatched them from the wilderness of Sinai, whereas Yeshua sent them across the Jordan. Pinchas and Caleb did not have far to travel and were gone for a very short time. Moshe sent 12 spies, one representing each tribe, as each tribe wanted to know how the land of Israel was suitable for their own specific needs. Remember, each tribe has its own quality. Right. Okay? And whether the land of Israel was worth the war. So this is a key thing, right? If they were sending spies because they wanted to know, well, I'm a merchant group. My people are. Will there be sufficient merchant routes for us to do our business? I'm a cattleman. Will there be grazing land for my cattle? Right. I'm a vintner. Right. My tribe makes wine. Right. Will there be good grapes to grow there? Right. So each tribe had a very self-serving interest. Right. Is it worth it for us to go to war and die in the war? Some of our men die in the war, right? In order to conquer this piece of land, right? And of course, the spies themselves might have concluded, it's better just to stay here in the Midbar. Right?
But in a way, it is better stay in the Midbar.
No, it's not, because their destiny was to be there.
It's God's plan.
Right. That's right.
Didn't want to go, but
and it's also not. It's actually not understanding the value of the land. Right, it is lashon hara towards Israel. This is actually was the sin of the spies.
Maybe it's not so much understanding, so much as accepting the land of Israel.
Okay.
And accepting different way of life.
One of the things you have to understand is that Israel and the land of Israel is not like accepting, New Amsterdam for the Dutch. We landed here, did it. Israel was a place that was, it's where the Avos are buried. It's where the promises made to the Jewish people. And it is, as it remains today, the center of, it's the place where mitzvahs can be done like nowhere else. It's the place where we have a relationship with God like nowhere else.
100%.
Moshe directed his agents with the mandate of viaturu et Eretz Canaan, to scout the land of Israel. The Torah never explicitly calls Moshe's agents spies, meraglim. They're never called meraglim, actually, in the Parsha.
They're tourists.
They are called tayarim.
Similar word?
Tourists in today's lexicon.
Tourists, yeah.
Yeshua openly called his agents meraglim, spies. A tourist seeks to praise the land and therefore looks to commend the virtues of the land he visits. Those are the questions for which Moshe sought answers. Are the people strong? Is the land conquerable? Are the cities fortified? Is the land fruitful? A spy, by contrast, doesn't look for the strength of a nation. He looks to expose ervat haaretz, the weakness of the land.
The openness, the open area.
They want to know the weakness of the land, right? The nakedness of the land. The weakness of the land, vulnerabilities that the invading army can exploit. If this sounds a little bit like the art of war, Sun Tzu, You shouldn't be surprised. Sun Tzu says that one spy is worth 10,000 troops. Interesting, in the art of war. Sun Tzu was a Chinese military philosopher.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Art of War. Sun Tzu.
You know that?
The tourist sometimes exaggerates. The land was too good, the people were giants. The spy looks for weak points and finds them. In Moshe's time, the question was, should they invade? The question for Yeshua was only, how should they invade? It's a very different set of questions, right? It's not should they invade, but how should they invade? Thus, Moshe's spies traversed the entire land of Israel. They were full tourists. You know, when you go to Israel, you go to the south, you go to the north, you look at the mountains, the streams, the beaches, everything. Yeshua's spies only went to Yericho, and indeed, only to Rechav's house.
Collect intelligence.
That's right. Moshe's spies were also dispatched publicly with pomp and ceremony. Yeshua's spies were sent secretly by Yeshua, and as a covert espionage mission, reported directly to and exclusively to Yeshua. Right? There was no public statement when they came back. The land is this. Look at the grapes. Here's this. Right?
Listen, because they went to Rahab, what would they say publicly?
But you know what?
And prostitute was good.
But you know what? She was very
discreet,
popular because the arm that's sitting in a desert. Nobody in contact with those people. They're just studying Torah. They're living their Jewish lives, and they know about prostitute in Jericho. She was very famous.
She was tremendously famous.
How it came to those Jews?
You know, Helen, right, of Helen of Troy.
Yeah.
You know, lived in Troy in Asia, but she was known all through the world, you know, for her great beauty, right? Rechav was more so, even more so, right? Rechav was famous everywhere. Right? They went in secret and were told, make yourselves like deaf mutes, so no one will be aware of your presence. Or pretend to be pottery salesmen, merchants who will attract no attention at all, right? Look like everybody else. Have a reason to be there, right? This obviously justified Yeshua's confidence in the ultimate success of the mission. But if the conquest of the land would be accomplished through miracles, why was the mission authorized in the first place? What information was Yeshua seeking? We must explore the connection of Rechav to this mission and why our home became the base of operations. Should we continue a little bit more?
Yeah, let's finish the Rechav story.
No, I don't think we'll finish the Rechav story today.
More than much of this.
Okay, we'll continue. The mission itself. Right. If the spies went to Rechav's inn, nice term, it was not because they were seeking information on troop movements, arms depots, or the strengths and weaknesses of Yericho's fortifications. Yeshua's spies went to Rechav because they sought to gauge the spiritual level of the nation, whose land they were about to enter and conquer. Yeshua endeavored to harmonize the spiritual level of the Jewish people with that of the inhabitants of the land. He wanted to see what the spiritual power of both were. Right? Because until the natives were to be expelled or eliminated, the moral climate of the land would greatly influence the Jews themselves. They needed to ascertain whether the Jewish people, as presently constituted, were spiritually compatible with their exalted assignment. So this is actually something that the Jews are warned about and concerned about. They're about to enter a land of idol worship. And idol worship is not, we have to always keep this in mind. Idol worship is not simply about the foolishness of, praying to a piece of wood or a piece of stone. Idol worship involved a lack of modesty, to say the least. Idol worship involved orgies, it involved tremendous amount of sexuality, it involved drinking, licentiousness, all kinds of things. They were tremendously exciting, right? And very appealing. So the question was, if you're going to enter this land, right, are you up to a couple of things? One is the mission of conquering it militarily. But once you've conquered it militarily, you're now going to move into a place of this tremendous tumor of lust, of uncontrolled appetites, right? Are you going to be absorbed into that, right, or not, right? I think I mentioned this the other day when we were talking about Esav and Yaakov, that when Yaakov saves me from my brother Esav, right, his concern is about being absorbed into the Esav lifestyle. Not just being killed or killing, but being assimilated into it. So Joshua had to know that we can not only have a victory, military victory, but we will not be drawn into this immorality. Right? Because if we're drawn into this immorality, right, that will be the end for the Jewish people.
That's
right? God will forsake us under those conditions. Right?
I don't understand, because when they're spying, they just find out that nobody's very excited, everybody impotent.
That's right. That's good. That's good, actually.
Solution to the problem.
The war of conquest of the land of Israel was not to be won through superior military tactics, but through the superior ethical commitment of the Jewish people to the values of Torah. Do not perform the practice of the land of Egypt in which you dwelled, and do not perform the practice of Canaan to which I bring you. This is in Vayikra. Right? Who would have greater insight into the moral level of the people of Canaan than Rachav the harlot? She knew these people.
This is why he's marrying her, makes a decent woman out of her.
Rachav epitomizes the immorality of the Canaanite society. The purpose of the spies, now listen carefully, the purpose of the spies' mission was to attempt to subdue and nullify the shell of impurity that typified the Canaanite world. The impurity that the Jewish people were to uproot and eradicate. And interestingly enough, by the way, one of the great wars of the Torah, right, has been a war against Avodah Zarah, right, and all of the licentiousness that goes with it. It has met with very good success. That is to say that we're not a perfect society. But when you compare this form of religion to the success of the religions that came from Judaism as well as Judaism, the Torah has had a tremendous success in this area. Obviously the job is not finished, but it's much better than it was. Pinchas and Caleb, representing the Jewish people, were tested whether they could resist the allures of Rachav herself and render the Jewish people worthy of the land of Israel. The spies were sent by Joshua from Shittim, the very same place that the Jews years earlier were seduced by the women of Moab. Right? You know, this repetition of place names, you know, affected us actually this week. Where was Joseph sent to meet with his brothers? His father said, go to meet with them in
Moab.
Shechem.
Shechem,
the place where Shimon and Levi had killed all the men.
All the men from Hamor.
And Yaakov said, that's a good place to meet with your brothers. Right? You know, and we know that the brothers were getting ready to kill him at that point when they saw him.
Cool.
In fact. Yosef. Yeah, they wanted to kill him, right? Yosef was, you know, when his father said, go meet your brothers in Shechem, he must have had a thought to himself, this is not where I would most like to meet with them. You know, today Shechem is Nablus, by the way. Right. So here we are again with this repetition, right? The spies left from the place in which the Jews gave in to idol worship, the most really disgusting forms of idol worship, you know, involving feces, involving all kinds of disgusting things, and were seduced by the women of Moab at the time. This was the place where Pinchas did what he had to do, right? Right? They left from Shittim, the very same place where the Jews earlier had been seduced by the women of Moab. The very event that had prompted Pinchas to kill Zimri, the prince of Israel. By the way, that's another way that a prince loses his position, right? And Cosby, the princess of Midian. In referencing Shittim, the Navi is not merely relating geographical or historical information about the mission, but rather the motivation behind the mission. It's a kind of tshuva. to recreate the sanctification of God's name that Pinchas and Caleb had separately accomplished. Pinchas had previously overcome Israel's attraction to immorality of Shittim, and Caleb had been inoculated against any surrender to immorality through his first trip to Hebron and his inspiration at the graves of the Avos. Right. So here you have two people, right, who have the power, to face the greatest temptation possible. In the heart of Canaanite immorality, Pinchas and Caleb would demonstrate to Rechav the new force in the world that would transform the moral aspirations of mankind, the power of Torah commitment. Indeed, Rechav naturally attempted to seduce Pinchas and Caleb. Mm-hmm. The very first night they were hidden in her inn. For the first time in her life, Rechav failed. And neither spy was influenced, enticed, or even moved by Rechav. Instead, they stood before her like angels, malachim, without any thoughts of sin, and amazingly had a profound effect on her. In an instant of moral clarity, Rechav repented. She made tshuva. Mm-hmm. No man had ever resisted her entreaties before, and now two men had arrived at her inn and showed no interest in her. She sensed in them their abomination of sin and recognized that there was a purpose in her life beyond providing immediate gratification for men. For the first time she recognized that the true pleasure in life was the enjoyment which surpasses all other enjoyments, is the merit of eternal life. Rechav realized something that she didn't think existed. She was a tremendously successful entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And more than just the wages of sin that she would get from her brothel, she was an insider trader. She knew when the price of oil would go up, the price of wheat would go up, she could invest. Mm-hmm. She was doing tremendously successful, and it was all based on her ability to manipulate men through sexuality. Mm-hmm. Right? And she had concluded after 40 years of this tremendous success that this was the greatest force in the world. The force of sexuality. Right. And that she could control kings and generals and tycoons with this, right? Now she runs into these two people, right, who've been living in the desert, right, who are part of this mythological people that they've been hearing about for 40 years, that they just destroyed Sichon, the giant, and Og, the giant, right? And now she's looking face to face with them, and she says, in the end, they men. We know what to do with men, right? I have all the powers of seduction, myself and the ladies in the building. And suddenly she realizes, no, there is a force greater than this in the world, right? And when she becomes aware of it, her respect for it, right, is so great that her whole life changes on a dime. It doesn't crumble. It changes on a dime. Right? And because if it crumbled, she would become weak. It's clear that she's not weak. She remains very strong, but she's taken all of her strength and turned it on its head into another way. Right? As soon as Pinchas and Caleb transformed Rechav, the prostitute, into Rechav the penitent, they realized that their mission had been accomplished and that Canaanite society would similarly be overturned. If Rechav had been successful in tempting Pinchas and Caleb, or they had been unsuccessful in capturing her neshama, the conquest of the land could not have proceeded immediately. Yehoshua knew from bitter experience that some Jews would have yielded to her charms and thereby jeopardized the entire mission. Right. Instead, through the moral greatness of the spies, the shell of Canaanite immorality was pierced and nullified, and its grip on the world was weakened. Rechav, the prostitute,
was destroyed.
Was out of business.
Was destroyed.
She was now Rechav the spy. Rechav, the secret agent of Israel. Right? And she could put away all the other things and use her strength, her knowledge, her insights on behalf of Israel. I think we should hold here.
Yeah. Ancient Ganesan, ancient Matahari.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Matahari.
Absolutely. With the exception that Matahari decided to just be a double agent and use her charms on whoever, right? Rachav said, I'm out of this business now,
principle,
right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm going on a different track, and that track is the track of Israel, the track of the God of Israel, with all the things that are involved in it. And only through this she was qualified for the role that she was destined to play as we go forward. I think we should hold here with the question of what changed Rachav.